This is Siddharth Alwalia. Welcome to the 100x Entrepreneur Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Prime Venture Partners, an early stage VC fund led by Amit Somani, Shripati Acharya, and Sanjay Swamy. Prime is often the first institutional investor in category creating tech startups in fintech, SaaS, healthcare, and education, such as Ezetap, MyGate, and SignUp. To know more about Prime, visit primevp.in. Today, I have with me Sanjay Swamy, Managing Partner, Prime Ventures. Welcome, Sanjay, to the podcast.
Thank you, Siddharth. It's great to be on the podcast with you.
Sanjay, we'd love to know more about your journey. You have been a Bangalorean right from your growing up days. How was it growing back in Bangalore 30 years ago?
You have a long story, but actually did not grow up in Bangalore. I'm a Kannadiga, but I grew up till I was 10 in Orissa. Dad was in the Air Force and later at HAL set up the mega engine factory there. So grew up in a very small town till I was 10, then moved to Bangalore and then did my school here at St. Joseph's Boys High School and then undergrad at UBC Bangalore. And then moved to, this was, I would say, in the 80s. And then after that, towards the end of the decade, I moved to France for 2 years, did a master's in flight control systems in avionics in Toulouse at the National Aerospace School called Supero. Then went to University of Washington, Seattle, got a second master's, and then worked in Silicon Valley for 11 years, came back to India, and then have been here since the last 15, 16 years. So that's been sort of the journey. But as a Bangalorean, as a Kannadiga, really enjoyed living in Bangalore in the 70s and 80s. It was a pretty small town, Indranagar, which is now seen as the hub, is where, I grew up. Parents built a house and our family thought we were crazy to go that far out because most local Kannadigas are, Jayanagar, Baswantgudi is the core, or Malleshwaram. You could get from one end of Bangalore to the other at any time of the day in 40 minutes max. I used to ride my bicycle to school from Indranagar, come home for lunch in 12 minutes. I don't think you could expect to do that in 12 minutes unless you're in an airplane. So it was a great time to be in Bangalore. Obviously, the weather has always been one of the best in the country, and that's still the reason why people love to keep moving to Bangalore. I moved out of India and Bangalore in 87, came back in 2003, and it was night and day. Right, I mean, you just couldn't imagine. Whitefield was not considered to be a part of Bangalore. Many people jokingly might not consider it even today. But it really wasn't seen as a part of Bangalore at the time. It was close to Bangalore. And now it's, the city has expanded. The population has grown 5x. There's been a lot of change in the city. It's sort of unrecognizable in many ways, unfortunately. But it still remains, the culture of, welcoming people from all over. And sort of the climate is, of course, hard to beat anywhere in the world. And so as a city that combines, the best of the breed from a tech perspective, as well as the weather, as well as the locals being, many people come to Bangalore and they don't bother to learn Kannada because they don't need to. That's both a strength and a weakness of the city in some ways because, it is, everybody feels at home as soon as they walk in. But also, I think the locals sometimes are a little resentful, I would expect. But, I think it's a lovely place and, for me, it's home. So I'm thrilled doubly. But it is a very different city from where it was.
Tell us about your experiences and work in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so I was in the Valley from 92 to 2003. My first job actually was in the startup founded by Naren Gupta, who was the co-founder at Nexus here. So Naren's been a long-time mentor and friend, I guess is the right word. He's just an amazing person to be associated with. So I worked from 92 to 99, 7 years, my first job. It's probably one of the best things I did. I had a long stint in my first role. And after a period of time, I started in customer service and training. Then I moved to sales. Then I moved to engineering. Then I moved to international business development. And then I moved to marketing. Right. So I did almost, finance and HR being the only two things that I didn't do in that company. And in hindsight, maybe those were the two most important ones from a VC perspective. But I really saw, a lot of the customer-facing roles, and I also saw what it took to build really high-quality software. And that part really, I think, was the formative years for me. So I still advise youngsters saying your first role, spend a lot of time if it's a high-quality company and if you're getting growth and opportunities to do different things, right? Obviously, as an engineer, one tends to stay in engineering. But if you have the personality to go out, meet people, talk about technology to them, it's actually amazing to be sort of an evangelist, which was the role I had for the longest time. I then spent about a year and a half at Xerox PARC. So during this was the time, 92 to 99, where every day there was somebody coming up with a new business plan, and it was the .com era, and, everything was very, very exciting. Everything could only go up, up, and up. So the .com, and the internet era sort of bug hit me, and I got a call from a friend who had joined a small startup team at Xerox PARC. Xerox, of course, PARC is famous and legendary for, building some of the most amazing tech products, and everything from, the legend goes that Steve Jobs came here and, and he saw the operating system that Xerox had built for photocopy machines, and then he said, well, this is how I'm going to build the Mac. And we were in the digital rights management group that Xerox was trying to turn into a business. Eventually, I had the privilege there of engineering spin out in a joint venture with Microsoft, got to meet Steve Ballmer, and it was a very exciting time, 99-2000. But it was clear that wasn't going to be housed inside Xerox. It was going to be spun out. I then joined a Silicon Valley post-IPO startup called Portal Software, which was a darling of the telecom billing space. It was worth, I think, at $1.7 billion. Had really shot up. And learned how to bring, technology or billing software to the media entertainment industry. Drove the sale of a multi-million-dollar contract, and probably the only company to have collected more than $1 million in revenues from Napster. We got to meet Sean Fanning at the time. So it was a very exciting time to live and work in the Valley in the media entertainment industry, supplying technology to them. Got to work with Sony Pictures, all of the big names, brands that we keep seeing now. Of course, this pre-Netflix era. Then I got laid off, right? Portal was going through a downtime, and, they decided, only focus on wireless. And so I came in with a $250,000 PO. And the CEO said, thank you very much, and you don't have to show up tomorrow, right? And then it really hit me that if you're not in control of your life, right, a lot of strange things can happen. And the entrepreneur bug hit me, but also the India bug hit me at the time, right? So one of the things that happened was, of course, I took a break, hadn't been to India in a while. My wife was working at a startup that went IPO, and we had just been heads down working on all of that. So I came back to India in 2003, thinking I would come on a holiday. And then, it's been, people say in the US, you always have the N+1 syndrome. You always say, I'll go back next year. I've had the N+1 syndrome in India. And then after that, now we're back to staying here.
And tell us between the time, 2003 to 2006, before you joined mCheck as CEO.
Yeah, so actually when I came to India on that first vacation, I took an auto and I was asking the driver, time kya hua? And at that time, Reliance had just launched with RCom. And he pulled out his phone and read out the time to me. And that was the aha moment where it hit me, saying he has a connected terminal in his hand. And that's when I said, well, we got to come back and live in India and see what's going on here. Can we, and literally a mobile version of PayPal was sort of the concept that I was thinking about. Came back to India, and as I was literally coming to India, one of my friends reached out and said, hey, I've got a team in India. I would like somebody to help me lead that team for, do you mind spending some time with them? And so that's how I joined a company called mPortal. Spent about 9 years with them, and then decided to do something more sort of product-oriented. So I then was, there was a Valley startup called Katera, which was a Kleiner Perkins funded startup in the procurement space, setting up sort of an Ariba on demand. Salesforce had done that to CRM, and they were trying to do this for procurement. and they hired me in to set up the India operations. And we went about it quite differently because I had never built an engineering team. I just briefly worked in an engineering team in all my years. I'd never written code. So set up, like a business guy would, went about, everybody was putting ads in the papers for, J2ME and Struts or Java and J2SE or whatever it was, J2EE. And I put a photograph of a motorbike and said, hey, one of you could win this thing, right? So we tried to do everything differently, and we built, I think, one of the best teams out there. There are probably about 15 startups that have come out of the first, 30 employees that joined Kredx over the years. One of which I co-founded with Amia at ZipDial and Valerie from my mCheck days. But during that entire stint, this itch to do mobile payments was something that I had, always had. And I had been introduced to Rajesh Jain, who is, of course, legendary as an entrepreneur and investor in India. And DFJ was funding mCheck and spinning it out of a little world, and they had asked him to co-invest. And so that's when he called me and said, hey, do you want to come on board? So fast forward to middle of 2006, after working out the transition with Kredx, I decided to join mCheck, initially as CEO, and then very soon became the CEO because the founder decided to go back and do something else.
So tell us about the mCheck journey. You were ahead of your time. And at what point did you realize that, this journey is a little ahead of your time?
So I think that's being complimentary to me. I'm sure we made a lot of mistakes. And if I look back now and all the things I've seen startups do, I think I would attribute a lot of mistakes and things that we did not do right. But having said that, it certainly was very ahead of its time because I don't think India had the infrastructure for it, right? Without Aadhaar, for example, opening an account was very, very time consuming, right? And this was a phase where we were still on the feature phone technology stack, though mCheck was a SIM card based application. It still was dependent on SMS and SMS delivery and things like that. So, we were trying to build a two-sided network because you needed to be on mCheck in order to accept the payment, and you needed to be on mCheck in order to make the payment. We were riding on Visa's interoperability rails, but it was still a very, very early days in the Indian market, right? Mobile penetration was growing, and that was the primary focus of the operators, right? Just get mobiles out there as much as possible and do a land grab on the market share. Banking was still sort of a niche product then, and the idea of using the mobile to bring people into banking was seen as a long-term thing. But, it was one of those where I look back now and say, what were we thinking, right? We thought we could pull this off in 18 months as a startup with, $5-10 million of funding. In hindsight, it's taken 15 years, and we're still sort of scratching the surface today, right? As much as UPI has had a great run in the last 3 years, and Paytm prior to that as well, we're still sort of at a very nascent stage. So I think certainly timing-wise, we were way off in our overestimation, right? But having said that, it was also a very complex product, right? It required partnerships at a very different level. To get us an application on the SIM card of a telco is next to impossible. And we had it on 300 million Airtel and Docomo SIM cards. That was something that was incredible for a startup to pull off. So we clearly had something very unique there that they also believed in at the leadership level, right? These permissions to even experiment with this go all the way up to the very top in such situations. But we also had to partner with Visa, with the banks, and we had partnerships with HDFC Bank, with ICICI Bank, State Bank of India. So we achieved a lot in sort of cultivating and educating the market, but clearly, it was a large ecosystem play and not something that a startup could do. And if you have noticed later on, the startups that have succeeded in this space worldwide haven't been the ones that have tried to do it all in an ecosystem play, right? Either they've taken control of their destiny, like in the case of a Paytm, or, the ecosystem play was done by NPCI, by the government, and then the startups like the PhonePays and even Google Pay and all of the others that have gone ridden on top of the ecosystem play that was being done by the government, right? So we were trying to do it all in a small startup. And in hindsight, that was, we were being perhaps too ambitious. But it was a great journey. I think every day I spent there I really was, waking up in the morning saying, I just can't wait to get to work. And it always seemed like we were at the cusp of doing something really spectacular, and the prize was really worth winning, right? As has been played out over the last few years. And that used to be always the fuel and the motivation. And at some point after 4 years of trying really hard, it was clear that that wasn't happening anytime soon. And a lot of the infrastructure issues still remained as much as we had tried. And that's when I felt it was time to move on.
It was essentially banking on an SMS.
Banking on a secure SMS. To this day, I maintain is the most secure form of mobile banking that's been implemented in the world. Because it was on the SIM card. The SIM card is a smart card. It's like a hardware security module in your pocket that has never been tampered with or broken, right? So everything else right now, there is all these issues where you say, somebody was on vacation and someone went to Vodafone and said, give me a new SIM card and this is my fake, and produces a fake ID, and this, and now pilfers money out. None of those were possible on technology that is embedded on the SIM. So I think it was a very superior technology, and it's unfortunate from that sense that the world did not get to benefit from it. It's happened in small places, like in Estonia, for example. The whole country's national ID system still runs on the security of a SIM card. But also technology has moved forward, right? I mean, with cloud-based solutions and, with AI and all of this, right? I mean, ultimately, security is a very expensive thing. And what you try to do is make sure that the fraud that's there is below a certain acceptable limit. No system has zero fraud, right? So at some point you make these trade-offs, and I think we've got a really good solution now today where the upside is really high and the fraud is within limits and is just managed through risk management.
Then Aadhar happened. Tell us about how that journey started.
Yeah, so my journey with Aadhar was kind of interesting because when the program was announced, I was still at mCheck. And I wrote a blog on Medianama, which ended up being one of the very well-read blogs on why perhaps the SIM card should be used instead of a smart card. And after I finished my stint at mCheck, it was still February 2010, and I wanted to take a year off. But I did tell my wife, look, I will reach out once to the UID team and see if I can help in any way. And obviously, given the fact that I had tried to help with opening bank accounts for in the large numbers, that experience and with the mobile becoming a larger part of the future for the country, I had some first-hand experience that was kind of relevant. And so they met the team and happened to meet Nandan and talked to him. He said, well, if you have a few months before your next thing, would be great if you can help in some ways. As some of you may know, the Aadhar program, Nandan had brought in about 15 to 20 people from the private sector as full-time volunteers, some as little as 3 months, some lasted, 4 to 7 years. People like Pramod Verma and Sanjay Jain and Vivek Raghavan, who worked sort of behind the scenes and really tried to just define the right architecture for it. But there were also people who came from all over the world and participated in the research of how should the number be designed so that it doesn't have any risk of how should I say any assumptions one can make from the number and so on, right? So it was very scientifically done, and the best brains from around the world came, not just Indians or Indian diaspora, but from all over. And so a few of us had the privilege of being full-time involved with the program. Some were pro bono, some were actually employees. I was in the pro bono category. And worked as volunteers with the UIDAI, and really with one goal in mind, right? Just define and help facilitate and do what's best for the country in the long run. And it's amazing to see how this group of people, could constantly work together, putting aside all differences. We may have been competitors in our private market or in our professional lives earlier, but it didn't matter. There was only one common goal. And looking back at it 7 years later, or now 9 years later, it's just unbelievable to think what has happened. India has essentially enrolled the country of Singapore every week non-stop for 6 years in a row, or the country of Australia every month non-stop for 6 years in a row, to get it to over 1 billion users now. So it's something, it was a point in time, I happened to be connected to the program, and was a privilege to be a part of.
So I would say the first part of your journey in India, the mCheck, got you like fascinated and curious about mobile payments, and the Aadhaar journey got in you the bug of scale, and then you combined both of them to start Angel Prime.
Yeah, so I would say mCheck also had hit some pretty large scale. I don't think there's any mobile payments company yet that had the distribution that we had achieved, right? We were on 350 million SIM cards. But you're right, absolutely. Achieving scale is not the easiest thing, and the Aadhaar program also helped think scale right from the beginning, right? And I think that's something that even later on, as an iSpirit volunteer working with the team on India Stack and things like that, we've only been thinking about can we impact 200 million people, right? The entrepreneurial side is very different actually, right? Because you're starting and, right now you're just thinking about the first customer, the first paying customer, how do we get to 100,000 million users if it's a consumer play and so on. So the 0 to 1 play is actually the most exciting part, at least for me, because everything is possible, right? You can have a business model that says I'll take no money now and make it up later. I can charge money now. You can change games, everything, right? Product also, there are no boundaries that you define, right? You say, well, this is what the target customer is, and this is what the product should be for them. And, you go with your gut feel or your intuition or your market research, and eventually you refine it, right? Now, the VC had once told me it's like a sculpture, right? You keep refining it, and, you can't just say this year I'll only work on the head and the right arm and then figure it out. You have to actually do it holistically. But, clearly to me at the time, doing another startup was one option, but I really felt I enjoyed the 0 to 1 phase, and not so much the 1 to 10 phase, and I was probably not very good at it as well. And so I said, look, but if you're doing a startup, you need to be able to do that and go the whole journey. And I felt my time would be better suited if I worked in the very early stage. To my good fortune, Shripati and Bala, who were also volunteers at Aadhaar, and I knew Shripati from his, we had done an angel investment together, and so we got to know each other. We had a very similar mindset, right? We all felt that this is the phase we really enjoyed, right? And so that's why we said, let's start Angel Prime together. I had already started ZipDial, and both as a co-founder and as an angel investor, and I'd also started dabbling in Ezetap, building some hardware around it. So ZipDial, we ended up being angel investors in the company also. And then for Ezetap, we said, hey, how about we do this more formally and raise a fund, our pool of capital, and do this across multiple companies. And that's when Angel Prime was formed. So this is in 2012.
And I believe ZipDial was a plan you discussed on a plane with Valerie.
Yes. So during my mCheck days, this very young, smart American lady reached out to me and said, I've been hearing a lot about interested a lot in mobile payments, and I've been hearing about you in India. I'd like to just come and work with you. I'm going to quit my job at eBay. It was the easiest interview I've ever had. And turned out to be an amazing person, super motivated, came here, genuinely wanted to learn about India, about emerging markets, and, work sincerely here. Her work ethic was something I used to keep saying, can you replicate yourself, 3 times and then 3 times again? Because that's the caliber of work was just amazing. And on one of our trips, I think to Airtel or something, that on the way back on the flight, we were discussing, tap and pay and things like that. And suddenly I said, hey, I think we could do some of this stuff on a missed call. And so she came home that weekend, we sat down and we thought about 70 or 80 different things you could do with a missed call that were not being done with a missed call. And then we kind of had shelved that. This is sort of an advice I give all entrepreneurs. When you have an idea, write it down and put it away for some time, and then see if it keeps bugging you nonstop, right? And that's when you feel, well, maybe there is something here, right? Because no matter what you do, you'll start seeing use cases that keep increasing. And so after I left mCheck, she was still, very motivated she was still at mCheck at the time. And she said, hey, we need to give that idea an opportunity. And coincidentally, one of my early Katera employees, Amia, had also reached out and said, what are you doing next? And I just told him, I have this crazy idea with a friend of mine. And his immediate response was, that's a great idea. So we said, then let's put it to test. So we just quickly, did something, and Val said, let's launch this on IPL day. So on the first day of IPL, we launched a poll. It was called Indie Polls, and Ashish Sinha had plugged in, which is now Next Big What, was kind enough to cover us. Ashish and I had actually worked together at Kredx, and he gave us a little coverage, and we suddenly started seeing people were actually using the service, right? And there were some amazing things we tried to just growth hack our way. But ZipDial was launched. In fact, Amir had fractured his left hand, so it was literally coded single-handedly. No, pun. And then we just put it out there on a $20 quarter server on SliceHost, right? And so we validated complete product market fit with less than $100 spent in this thing. And that's when we said we better create a company here. There is something here, right? And so it's interesting, validating product market fit can happen without a lot of money, right? And of course, after that, what does it take to scale it? Is there really a large market opportunity? All that has to be done with a lot more research. But PMF can actually be established very, very quickly. So the ZipDial journey, actually, it got a little more serious because once we put out, there was World Cup Soccer in 2010, and matches would end at 3 a.m. and Amir and I would watch all these matches. So he would just update the latest score. And every morning people would dial a number and they would get the results of the World Cup because it was too late for the newspapers also to include the results there. So you just give them the result on SMS, right? South Africa beat whoever. One day we both sort of accidentally slept off and didn't update the score. And we got a bunch of irate people calling saying, what happened to the score? So actually people were depending on this, right? And that was the moment. And we said, let's go in whole hog. And then we put in some more money in and raised a bunch from Angels and from Mumbai Angels at the time. And then World Cup cricket happened, right? The first day of the India-Bangladesh match, Sachin and Sehwag both scored centuries in Dhaka. And we hit 4 million calls on ZipDial. Wow. And that's when AWS, by the time it moved to AWS, and Amazon called and said, who are you guys that all of a sudden you have 4 million server hits? And probably were more, we just couldn't handle the load, right? And that happened, and then India, of course, won 2011 finals, and ZipDial was like up and away at that time. But by that time, we had started realizing business use cases. Gillette wanted to use us, P&G wanted to use us for sampling and things like that. And later on, coincidentally, during the 2014 elections, both the political parties actually used ZipDial quite extensively to reach out to the masses, and the integration with Twitter happened, and so more people were brought into it. So that was part of the ZipDial journey. But it was clear at some point that it could be an interesting company, but probably not a long-term spectacular company. At least that was the common logic. And we hadn't raised a lot of money, right? In the life of the company, we had raised a little over 2 million. So when Twitter came by and it turned out to be the right exit, everybody got a solid return, right? So big takeaway from me from the ZipDial case was, if you don't raise too much money, even a mid-sized or a relatively small exit can be very meaningful to everyone. The founders, all the angels got 10 times in 4 years. The last VC got 2.5x in 4 months, I think. So it was very attractive to everyone, and the founders did very well, right? So I always tell founders also, don't be in a hurry to raise just because you have access to the capital. Be sure that you have a business you can build here, because sometimes you get trapped when you raise too much money and at outrageous valuations, and you have to grow into that valuation, and it might take it's okay if you're going to grow into it in 12 months, but if it's going to take you 4 years to grow into it, then you have a problem.
And then you also parallelly started Ezetap.
Yeah, so Ezetap was sort of the lessons learned from mCheck, where don't try to build the entire thing, just build one side and expect that other people will build the other side. Which means that Ezetap was on the merchant side of accepting payments. We have Happay and Neo, which are on the consumer side or on the business side of making payments. In Ezetap, in mCheck, I was trying to do both sides of it, and in later on, I realized there's no need to do both sides of the network. Somebody will build the rails of interoperability and ride on it. So Ezetap started off little after Square, but we knew right from the beginning that we wanted complete encryption and things like that. So it was way ahead of what the market had, and in fact what Square had also at the time. We were first to launch, I think, the encrypted magstripe reader on a feature phone. And India was going through this e-commerce boom, so for Flipkart and later Amazon, for the delivery boys to carry a card on delivery instead of cash on delivery was an attractive starting point. So we had built a lot of the prototypes, but we'd got something working, and that was Bhakta and myself. And when we sort of formalized Angel Prime and we had funding and stuff, Bobby, Abhijit Bose, was a friend of Bala and Shripati, and I knew him from his NGPay days because we used to compete. So we talked about it, and it seemed like he had all the right passion and motivation for it as well, and he immediately understood the opportunity. So we got together and we started the company and invested in it. And in fact, for a long time, there was a 4-bedroom house in Koramangala, which had a ZipDial sign on it, but the unknown fact is that the 4th bedroom was actually Ezetap. So those were the early days, and those were the fun days.
How did you realize that, that this is the structure that you want to continue? Be the first builder or be the first sculptor of the company, give the idea, form the idea, and then along with the founders, take it to a journey to a certain level, and then let the founders continue it.
Yeah. So I would say it's become, if I look at how we have evolved, right? That was the right thing to do perhaps in 2011. But the market has evolved a lot, right? And Prime as a fund now has evolved a lot to primarily being a venture capitalist, right? With companies which are formed by founders. We still do the occasional incubation as we have done over the years. But mostly we are investors now. And I think that's how the fund has evolved. And also it's a reflection of how the market has evolved, right? So I think at the time, the maturity of the startup ecosystem, the scale of the startup ecosystem, the understanding of how to put the company together, how to get it structured right, put an ESOP plan in place, all of these things, right, were very nascent in India. There were a few, but it was still very, very early days. So at that time, we felt that we needed a much more active hand-holding type of a model. And in many cases also, we had the experience of seeing some stories play out that some of the younger entrepreneurs here had not seen. So even if they came with the passion and the motivation, as we brainstormed with them, we felt, well, you could build on this and evolve the idea to be something more robust and with more moats and things like that. So in the early days, that was that was the right thing to do. Over a period of time, as the market has evolved and the founder ecosystem has gotten more mature and people have worked at Flipkart and Ola and Paytm and Freshworks and the larger players here, second generation entrepreneurs, or at least founders who had previously worked in a startup that has seen growth have come out. Some of these lessons may not be that relevant anymore, right? Or people who have had their own unsuccessful startup. I never use the word failed startup. I always think, you learn so much that it's not a failure, but the company may have been unsuccessful, right? But there are a lot of lessons learned, as I would say I learned from my mCheck experience. So that maturity has improved a long time. The ecosystem has built up, the legal system has built up, finance and accounting and all of these have improved. And society has started accepting startup as being a first-class citizen from an employment perspective, right? So there's a lot of humorous anecdotes there, right? People who can't get a bride because somebody says, oh, he's working in a company that I haven't heard of, right? So those are no longer the case, right, or less important. So now we have evolved into saying, look, we'll still work with the early stage because that's where things are still being formed and there's a lot of fun there. And the value of our first-hand experience, as you know, along the way, Bala decided to become an entrepreneur again and Amit Somani joined Prime. So Shripati, Amit and myself as partners, we felt that we can give a lot of quality inputs and value because of our experience, and this is during the fun, formative part of the company. And at that, and beyond a certain point, scaling actually is in some ways independent of the business, right? The product market fit is very dependent on the domain. So that is a more challenging and exciting part. I have a lot of respect for people who are great at helping scale companies, but that's not who I am, and that's not who we are.
So Prime evolved from a thesis of your interest in building product-focused companies, technology-focused companies, and interest towards fintech and SaaS. Mm-hmm. Tell us more about how did you form this clarity that you want to only invest in product-focused company. You had, incubating companies like Urban Ladder where you didn't put money, but the founders worked out of your office.
Yeah. Now you're starting to make me feel bad about some of the things we didn't do. Of course, Ashko and Rajiv are amazing founders, and and in hindsight, it probably would have been an amazing investment for us as well. But our relationship with them was very different, right? We just said, "Oh, we like you guys. If you need some help, feel free to use our office." I remember sitting in a boardroom and tutoring Ashko on payments and payment gateways and wallets and all these other things. But we actually never considered investing, or they never considered taking investment from us. We just have always been friends, right? And we even discussed their seed round that they were doing without necessarily even thinking that this was something for us. Largely because we have never been big fans of people-intensive, operations-intensive businesses, right? They are a different DNA, right? And we never saw ourselves as being the experts in that. Again, deep respect for people who pull those off, businesses like Dunzo and Swiggy and so on. They are amazing businesses. As financial investors, we would have probably done very, very well. But we have a little bit in our mindset that says we are not just a check, right? We have to actually be able to add real value to the founders, and that's why founders come and work with us at Prime. It's not just about getting the money, and I think pretty much all the founders we work with would have been able to raise from elsewhere as well. We've been very fortunate with the founders that we have. But the question is, can we add real, non-linear value to their business in our thought process and stuff? And in those types of business, we wouldn't have. And that was the reason we didn't invest in some of the companies that we would have done very well as financial investors. But I don't think we would have felt we are doing what we set out to do. So our culture had always been in living in the Valley, working in the 90s, and then coming back to India, where you think about technology and product and saying there is probably a deep amount of investment that has to be done in the early days. But once you establish product market fit, then you hit escape velocity, then it's incredibly nonlinear in growth. And you don't need to keep pouring a lot more money beyond a certain point to fuel that growth, right? And so these are, some people call them gushers, right? That's what we're all striving for, rather than businesses where you have to constantly keep reacquiring the customer. So that's just a philosophy, something that we were comfortable with. And I think all three of us, Amit, Shripati, and myself, have come from that background. And I think we want to stick close to our roots.
You have invested in only 25 plus companies in the last 8 years and almost zero failures. Have you been too careful in investing?
I cringe when you use the word only 25 companies. It's a scary thought, when we started out with ZipDial and Ezetap and, we'll do one or two more. I never thought we were going to have it someday look back and say we'll have 25 companies in our portfolio, right? And again, as I said, I never used the word failures. We've had one company that we shut down very early on, Unamia. But other than that, yes, we've had, I think our model basically involves working very closely with the founders and understanding the deep context. And we have a very unique model where all partners work with all the companies. So even if I might be the lead partner on, say, a Neo, Amit and Shripati are equally involved or quite actively involved as well. So our philosophy has always been that, for founders, if you put the founder first, for founders, it doesn't matter to them that you as VCs have a portfolio, right? They're only interested in their company, right? And so I actually think that we want to see all our companies succeed, and we have to try our best to do it. Some will do much better than others, and some will do moderately well. Some will not make it, right? And that's life in this business. But really, I think some of the things, typically the founders, I think we've been very fortunate for the founders we've been able to get to work with, and I think we've done a great job of identifying some of them, or most of them. In the early days, we have worked close enough with them, even before we make the investment decisions, to know that there is a large market size. So, we've rarely taken market risks, but there are a lot of execution risks. And I think what ends up happening between a company that hits exponential growth versus, relatively flat growth is we may have mistimed the market, right? Or there may have been some execution risks or execution things that didn't go well, right? So timing is, of course, everything. At the end of the day, all these companies are good companies building great products. The success or lack of it is really determined by timing. Luck plays a very big role. What might have been a good idea or you might bump into an investor that's willing to do follow-on capital, or some might not. So a lot of these things also play an external factor. I would not be bold enough to say we've not had any that won't make it, but we've been fortunate so far that companies are doing quite well on almost all of them, and we're pretty excited.
So my question is around the investment process, right? All 4 partners, including Raj, have to vote in. It's not a majority vote. It's all partners have to make a yes for an investment. So that's where, is it being too careful that you can go away with false negatives, but
so the short answer is actually that's not true. We do have a system amongst ourselves, and there have been cases where we have invested where maybe not everybody was all in, maybe nobody was vetoing, but and that's an internal process that we have within the IC. I think the most important thing that we've been very lucky with, again, with all the 3 of us here, and Raj Mashruwala was a great mentor and partner emeritus in the fund, but really very active, is that I think there is complete trust within the team to speak one's mind, right? So I think it's very important in a partnership that, ultimately we are all adopting. This is not Sanjay's child or Amit's child or Shripati's child, it's our child, right? And so we have to be very honest with each other, right? Now, there are 3 things you can say. One is you can say, look, I'm all in, I love this company, and I have no reason to not do this investment at whatever terms make sense. The second is you can say, look, I'm not all in, but I'm not out either. I'm not against it, right? That happens, rarely. And then the third is, look, there's no way we should be doing this, right? Now, that might be an opinion and it might be right, but as long as you're willing to talk through it and you can understand the other person's point of view, one of you might change your mind or might not change your mind, right? But important thing is intellectual honesty here. I think that's the most important thing. We've been very fortunate with that. The other thing is, this is a business where we have to be associated working closely with the founders for 7 years at least, right? So it's very important to not go in with any trepidation, right? So that's why, we try to make sure that everybody really appreciates this business and is excited and is all in, right? Because you don't want to be in a situation where people are in doubt and are still going ahead, right? That's the worst thing that can happen. In fact, I would rather someone say, look, I'm completely against this, but if you want to go ahead, you go ahead, right? Because that person is also given a very honest opinion, right? And then you can make a business call, right? But I think what has also happened for us that's been very interesting is actually we are very different people, right? Amit, Shripati, myself, I think when people were to just see the 3 of us, you'd think that, we completely hate each other. We're a completely different, group of, or there's no way, well, I should take that back. There's no way the 3 of these people could be working together because we're completely different, right? Shripati is, Zen master, nothing will faze him, very, simple in his straightforward, common sense, logical in his thinking, right? Amit is super when it comes to the product side of things, very, very, he can really see a gem when when most people would not have realized it. And he knows a lot about what it's going to take to scale businesses, right? He's probably the only GP in India that actually was on the management team of a company that went IPO with Make My Trip. So he has seen that kind of scale. I have a very sort of, I like to keep thinking very maverick and out of the box. I don't look at spreadsheets. I don't try, for me, back of the hand, if this business seems to make sense and my gut tells me the people are good, that's good enough for me, right? Raj has seen it all, lived in the valley and so on. So all 4 of us bring very different backgrounds. So for the 4 of us to agree on something, it's because we've looked at it very differently. It's not common thinking. It's actually very different thinking that's come to the same conclusion. And venture capital is a business where you cannot live with false negatives. We will always have false positives. So Urban Ladder, Taxi for sure, several of these where we saw them before anybody else did. We might put them in the false positives category, right? We should have probably written a check, but we didn't. But what we can't have is the false negatives because those you live with, right? And I think that we've been pretty careful about. And we're really excited about the portfolio we've got. Companies like Neo, MyGate, Kredx, Moneytap, Happay, Of course, Ezetap from the early days, and some of the newer companies like Auto Capital and Sunstone and a few of the other ones, M-Fine. Really exciting companies. So we all know that there are companies that we would have loved to have had that we don't have, but at the same time, you have to make sure that the ones you do start working with, you absolutely adore and love, and that we've been very grateful and fortunate about.
So Prime has been very unique in thinking. When nobody saw MyGate as a $1 billion play, you were very heavy backers, all in MyGate from the day one, leading the first 2 rounds. How was this thinking developed, or what's the process behind it?
So I think there's no right or wrong answer in venture capital, right? There are different strategies, right? We know obviously very well-known funds here that do a large number of small checks and then double down on the ones that do well, right? We took a philosophy right from the beginning saying we're all in or not in, right? So once you have that philosophy, now the way you look at a business to come to that consensus, for us it's not a question of, that's okay, it's a small check anyway, it doesn't matter. It's the fact that we're writing, our checkbook has very limited leaves, right? And so we'd be very careful about which ones we write, and that's how we have approached it. But once you're all in, then it doesn't matter, right? Then of course you're all in, right? So how do you evaluate the businesses from that perspective? What's the background? I mean, every VC, we have a lot of respect for how they do things. We just have our philosophy, right? I always tell people, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I happen to be, as a startup, I've launched a venture capital fund called Prime, right? Along with Shripati and Amit here, right? So it's always been every startup does things differently, and we as a fund do things our way. It's what works for us, we think, and it doesn't have to work for other people, right? And we're all different, right? And a tremendous respect for the scale at which a Sequoia or an Axel or a Lightspeed, work with, or a Matrix, people like that, Nexus, all these larger funds. For the size of fund we are comfortable with and the stage we like to work with, this is the philosophy that works for us. So that's it. Once we're in, we want to have no doubts that if a founder has a problem at 3 a.m. and calls any one of the 3 of us, we'll do our best to help them.
Sanjay, when do we see Prime having a 300 million checkbook?
Never. That was an easy question.
Why is the reason for that?
Well, we have a philosophy that says in early stage, and with the approach we have, right, we're limited by our bandwidth, right? So as it is, as you said, 25 companies, you said only, I was saying, wow, we're 25 companies that we're working with. So I think we have to be structured very differently from machinery for, I don't think it's the issue is not so much about being able to raise 300. It's being able to manage and deploy it, right? And that's not who we are. That's not how we've set out to be, right? And, unless we fundamentally change something about what we stand for and how we go about it, I don't think we will never need to get to that stage. I should never say never, but, it's very unlikely unless we have fundamentally changed how we work.
And Sanjay, some of the portfolio companies which you have the founders, in their late 30s or early 40s. What do you think? Because you have been a founder in your late 30s or early 40s, they have advantage, these founders.
So earlier, I used to say that founders are either 40 years old or in their 20s, right? You never saw founders in their 30s. That's changing a little bit in India today. But, and I think the logic for that was, when you're young, you say, hey, I don't know anything about this, let me figure it out. And, I think I can do a startup to do this, right? And you have the beauty of, in some ways, lack of fear, lack of some amount of knowledge, which is a good thing because you're not biased by, rules that say these can be done, these can't be done. And, you always have the ability to be more aggressive because you say, I'll always get a second chance. When you're 30s, you're ending up building your career in a relatively stable, you're probably married with young children, planning things like that. So you need to hit some financial security goals. And so it's hard to actually leave in their 30s. In fact, I have most respect for founders in their 30s who give up, a high growth opportunity in the professional world and say, I want to become an entrepreneur. And then in the 40s, you're like, oh my God, I'm 40 years old. I always thought I was going to be an entrepreneur, right? In fact, in the US also, they say, the largest number of founders by age is when they're 39, right? You say, before 40, I wanted to become an entrepreneur, right? So each have their strengths, right? So when you're later on in life, certainly you have perhaps a business network, domain expertise. There is why you is a very easy question to answer, right? I literally wrote the book on this, and these are the gaps that I see in the industry. And if I had this, and this, I have all the business connections to go make this happen, right? So when you're looking at entrepreneurs in their 20s, it's about, you don't ask the question, why will you succeed and others won't? Because it doesn't make any sense. It's I have the raw energy and the power, right? And the desire. When you're 40s, that becomes a more relevant question. Why will you succeed, right? And they better have a strong answer to that, right, typically. Because that means that they're building on something that they've done in the past. So that's the other thing. If you're in your 20s, you could be working at Swiggy in food tech and say, I'm just going to do a fintech startup, right? There's no reason why your past, apart from your hustle and maybe tech skills, has got any reason to do, with what you're going to do. But when you're later in life, typically your past would have had a role to play.
And Sanjay, in the startup ecosystem especially, you are called the fintech guru, because everybody in fintech at least comes to you initially before starting a company for advice or ashirwad. What is so special?
So guru in this case just means old guy. It doesn't mean anything else. I've just been in this business from long before the concept of fintech existed. Been doing, whether it's been payments or with Happay with business expenses and things like that, right? Long before, or Ezetap with payment acceptance. So I think for me, financial services from India's perspective is, it's heavily underserved, and technology and coupled with Aadhaar and the whole India stack, eKYC, digital signatures, UPI and consent framework and all of these things, not to mention GST and so on. We suddenly have sort of three things, right? One is cloud and smartphone. Second is all of the India stack piece. And the third is the underserved market here. And there are huge opportunities, I think, still to build large companies that can be very, very profitable and fundamentally will uplift society, right? So this is not just for profit, for the sake of profit, but you can be hugely profitable and dramatically improve people's lives. And I think entrepreneurs, ultimately, everybody might think in saying, if I go in here, I'm going to make a lot of money. But the ones that succeed are the ones for whom the mission is substantially more important, that they really feel that they're making and improving people's lives. Because as an entrepreneur, you're going to have 360 days of frustration and 5 days of glory every year. And in a leap year, it'll be 361 days of frustration. You don't get that extra day even in a leap year. So what makes you wake up is yearning for those 5 days when the highs are so high that, it trumps everything else, right? And for that to happen, the mission has to be really, really strong, right? It's not about, the financial outcomes at all, right? Most entrepreneurs, I think beyond a certain point, come from, hardworking, honest upbringings, and the money beyond a certain point doesn't matter, right? What really matters is, do they succeed in the mission, right? So to me, that's a very important piece. And I think in India, financial services is a huge opportunity where we can improve people's lives. So this morning, for example, the electrician had come and repaired like a broken circuit breaker in my house. I had to pay him, and he had gone and paid cash. And I told him, can I send you money on UPI? And he said, I don't have any apps. I don't know how to do it. I said, do you have WhatsApp on your phone? He said, yes. I said, what about all your colleagues? I said, none of them do this. So this Saturday, I said, you know what? I'm going to conduct a class. I'm going to teach you guys how to use this. I don't care whether you use Google Pay or Phone Pay or Paytm or whichever app you want to use. But you should be capable of doing this, right? And that was, I think, the most valuable thing I could do here. Sure, I'm going to repay him for for the work he did, right? But I think we all have these opportunities, and I think this will materially move his life, right? My 83-year-old mother, of course, granted, I've been in mobile payments for 13 years now, so she only keeps hearing about this over the morning cup of chai. But she uses, Phone Pay, right? And I installed Bheem on her phone after it came out, and after 2 weeks, she said, no, please remove it. I just want to use Phone Pay because I can do so much more, right? And she uses it. Her brother, who was 15 years younger than her, or 13 years younger, he turned 70, and she sent him, a payment, birthday gift on his phone, and somebody else owed her some money and said, I'll come and meet you and return you the money. And she was like, no, just wire me the money. You're welcome to come meet me, but don't make this the reason, right? So I see that. I always tell people, if you have time with your elders, please put them on the internet, help them, get them a smartphone, teach them a little bit, because they actually have the time and the desire to learn actually, but they just probably struggle with learning, right? So I feel this whole area of fintech, financial services, will massively improve everybody's lives in India, and you can build very large companies doing it. So it aligns both the impact as well as the financial upside potential for startups. So why would you do something different?
I have the privilege of working with Sanjay at Prime Ventures. What I have observed about you is you have the depth as well as the childlike curiosity. How did you able to maintain this? Even if you are in your mid 50s.
So
the kind of energy that you bring, and
most people would say he's immature, but I really appreciate your putting that in positive light. I think when you lose your curiosity, you're dead, right? I think I look at that. In fact, I took a selfie with my 93-year-old uncle, and I posted it on Twitter, and somebody commented, the curiosity in his eyes is amazing, right? And I think for all of us, the moment we lose curiosity, life's not worth living. I think the most exciting thing is all the new stuff that's happening around us, and it's awesome to see, right? I mean, the fact that in my generation I had to write a check or I had to go get a demand draft and all these funny things, right? And today's generation doesn't have to go through that, or never saw a cassette player, or never saw perhaps even a CD, right? That's great. That's change that's happening. It's bringing the world closer. A lot of good comes out of it. Sometimes comes at a very heavy price, and we need to look out for that as well. But generally the change, I remember going and studying as a student, and once a week my mom would call me because I didn't have enough money to call her back, or later on I would, even when I did, it was $3 for the first minute and $1.66 per minute. And, you forgot what you wanted to say when you saw the clock ticking, right? Today you don't think about it at all, and you can pick up the phone and do a video call on WhatsApp, and, it's virtually free. Right, that's great. That allows people to travel, to do what they want to do, rather than be constrained by all these artificial things, right? And I think technology is helping a lot. Healthcare, for example. We have mFine, for example, that's doing these doctor-patient consults, with video consultation and so on. And eventually, of course, you still have to get the prescription from the doctor formally and all of that, so to comply with the law. But it's amazing to see, how quickly the AI is able to learn the patterns and suggest to the doctor, ask this question, ask that question. And we're getting to the stage where at least technology is going to help assist the reach of some fundamental things that we've been denied in the past. And for a country like India, tech is going to be the only way. India has less than 10,000 cardiologists for 1.3 billion people, which unfortunately is going to be the heart attack capital of the world. There is, to achieve even the same depth as the US does, right, or of penetration, we would need 10 times this number. And we only graduate 250 new cardiologists a year, right? So that's not happening in any of our lifetimes unless we use technology. So it's a very exciting time in India, whether you're doing healthcare, whether you're doing consumer internet, whether you're doing financial services, to leverage technology, leverage the beauty of the India stack, the health stack, and all these amazing things that the government is also very forward thinking and is promoting, to build large successful startups from scratch in short periods of time. There is access to capital, which was the other thing that was missing in the past, and also at the same time solve fundamental problems, right? So that's why I tell people, if you're not yet doing a startup, what are you waiting for?
Thank you so much, Sanjay. It was wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Siddharth. My pleasure.